Today we're going to drill down a little bit deeper into the key enablers that are going to help us accelerate growth in the MENA ICT sector. Okay, and that means looking at things like talent and human resources and things like outsourcing, content. Obviously, the perpetual question of content and what do we do with it or what we do about it. Cybersecurity, transforming telecommunications, games, and the gamification of our daily lives, women in technology, the value of intellectual property. It's all in your booklets. Now, because as you can see, we're kind of starting off a little bit late this morning, and people are still streaming in, we're going to sort of trim our sessions down to about 45 minutes apiece so that we can try to catch up with our schedule by the afternoon. Because as you can see, there are a lot of preparations around this, so it's very exciting. We're very much hoping that His Majesty King Abdullah II will grace us with his presence today. So we're going to try to catch up with our schedule. And now, without further ado, I will introduce the first plenary session this morning. And obviously kicking off the concept or the theme of accelerating development in the Arab world. We're going to look at investment, incubation, and entrepreneurship. Moderating this panel is, please welcome, Dr. Abdul Malik Jabir from MENA Apps. Dr. Abdul Malik.
Sabah al-Khair. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I know it's too early, and Omar was sharing with me this morning. Usually you should do some extraordinary efforts and incentives to encourage participants to come early in the morning, so we'll learn from him for next conference. I think this is one of the important sessions because it's touching on key issues. As we all know, and this is not new to any of you, this is a young region, the MENA region, with 70% of the population below 34, and the highest unemployment among youth, and that unemployment is even more within the educated segment of the youth. And by the way, this issue becomes more serious with the public sector not able to absorb jobs, and that's not only the issue for countries without oil like Jordan. We had the Kuwaiti Minister of Industry a week ago, and he was saying 90% of the working Kuwaitis are working for the government and only 10% working for the private sector. So even oil-rich countries cannot really deal with this problem. We also have other realities in this region with more than 130 million internet subscribers, high penetration of social media. More than 50 million Arabs are on Facebook, the highest penetration in the world with the social media. And of course, we all know the Arab Spring have created a new hype in the region among the youth in the Arab world. Now, we do have tens of millions of jobs that will be created by 2020, and that requires a lot of serious initiatives. Luckily, we have this e-entrepreneurship phenomena or era happening in the MENA region, and today we are lucky to have such a distinguished panel to address what are the developments, what are the gaps, what are the challenges, and what can be learned. I think one of the key questions that comes to mind talking about this acceleration in the Arab world is what are the requirements? What are the requirements for this acceleration to be successful? What is the role of the government? What is the role of the private sector? Do we have the right ecosystem to support that? What is needed to create this ecosystem? Can this be done on a country level, regional level, sub-regional level, pan-Arabic level? Why and why not? Is our education system, our regulatory system, our government, our culture ready to deal with these challenges and with these requirements at the same time? I think today these questions and others will be answered by a distinguished panel. And let me start by introducing our panel. We will have Ahmed Abdurrahman, who's from the KAUST University. He's managing the Entrepreneurship Center. We have Munir Nabati. He's the co-founder of Aticity Me. We have Wissam Rabadi. He's the executive director of the iPark in Jordan. We have Omar, who's founder and CEO of ArabNet. I'm sure you all know Omar from his fantastic events. And we have Rabish from the, he's a technology VP of EBRD. Also, EBRD is very active in the region. I will start by throwing the following question, and I would like to have, as you heard, we have to shave part of the session. I think a fundamental question is, based on your experience, what's your assessment of the skill set in the region, the level of innovation in the region? Do we have what it takes to have a successful entrepreneurship in the MENA region? And I will throw this question to the participants who are not from the region. To start with, the EBRD. I mean, looking at this region, do we have these entrepreneurs out there?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I had, I guess, the privilege of visiting or traveling to 11 of our countries of operation last year. So we focus on Central Eastern Europe, Russia, Turkey, and MENA. And I visited 11 of these countries last year, including Jordan. And definitely, I think all parts of the ecosystem are in place. There are real entrepreneurs in the market. There are real investors. There's real money flowing into these companies, good ideas. And of the 11 countries that I saw last year, I would consider Jordan in particular right up there with the best. Does more need to be done? Absolutely. But the elements are definitely in place, and it's very encouraging what I see and the commitment that I see also from the people.
Omar, you run the ArabNet and you host tens of entrepreneurs and competitions, and you also participate in international conventions on the same topic.
So, press the button.
Hello. Great. I think we have great entrepreneurs. I think actually the challenge is having experienced people. The challenge of collective experience is something that I talk about often. If you look at our technology industry, there are not that many people with 7, 10, 12, 15 years of experience working in technology. Companies like Google have only been operating in the market for 5, 7 years. So we don't have that much talent or not talent, but experienced people who can help take a company after it's founded to the growth stage. I think that's one of the biggest problems. The industry is growing very quickly. Traditional companies are moving more and more towards digital, and they're looking for talented people who can come in and run their digital divisions. And those people are few and far between.
Thank you. Let's talk about the serious gaps and challenges in the MENA region, facing the ecosystem, facing the entrepreneurs, facing the different stakeholders. And Abdurrahman, heading the Entrepreneurship Center at KAUST, how do you see the ecosystem and the challenges and the gaps that exist in the ecosystem, and how to deal with these gaps and challenges?
Yeah. Ahmed Abdul Wahab, yeah. So there's a lot of challenges existing, and one of them Fadi Ghandour was mentioning yesterday, which is education. In education part, if we just look in the high schools and the universities, one of the things that we need to really do more is emphasizing the importance and relevance of entrepreneurship for the young generation. Based on the analysis and report of the World Economic Forum, 75 million jobs need to be created by 2020, which is more than 40% in the current level. And a significant way to do so is really entrepreneurship. So that's why emphasizing entrepreneurship, not just in the universities, but in the school section, it's really very, very important. Along with another important factor, which is accepting the fact that most startups actually fail. So the acceptance of failure, it's one of the key issues that really needs to be tackled. That failure is a learning process. In order to succeed, you will fail. And so it's just part of it. And other segments is the funding, as we already discussed. But from the funding perspective, what we, for example, do is we look at it from a different perspective. As we know that most venture capitalists, for example, don't invest in startups based on the 1% or 5% of business plans that they invest. So we need to think it differently. So what we do is we help entrepreneurs and by focusing them what's the business opportunity, looking for what is the team around that they can attract, and the third point, what are the resources? And from the resource perspective, it's not about I need this amount of money, so I'm going to look for an investor, but more, how can I get the resources without paying cash? And so it's a different kind of perspective of how to help entrepreneurs to succeed.
Thank you. Wissam, iPark has been in business for 10 years. What's your point of view of the ecosystem that is appropriate for our region, the Arab world, that could really lead or help introducing successful entrepreneurs into the market?
Thank you, Dr. Yes, as you said, yes, iPark actually was launched exactly 10 years ago from this conference in 2003, from the ICT Forum. And over the past 10 years, been relatively successful in attracting startups and building successful companies and creating jobs in Jordan. And we learned a lot through that process. And I will go and I'll say it's true that the culture and the act of failure, accepting failure, and the culture of entrepreneurship was an issue. But actually today I see the opposite. It's like immediately we jump into the other direction. It's like a pendulum now. It's like oscillating, like the current when you turn on a switch. We're turning into entrepreneurship is cool. Entrepreneurship is a good way to get rich quickly and sell your company to Google. Entrepreneurship is the opportunity to take pictures with celebrities and royalties and big people. So now we're sort of switching to the other extreme. And maybe that's how it works. So just keep oscillating until eventually you find a happy medium and a steady state of that. But I think in an ecosystem, and we are part of a sort of a mini ecosystem. We're part of a science city or a technology park, Al Hassan Science City, that has a couple of universities, actually until recently 3 universities. Around us, the Royal Scientific Society, the Ministry of Higher Education, Scientific Research Support Fund. It's like a hub of a lot of science and technology institutions in Jordan. I see that the players are there, developed to some extent and not yet as mature as we want them to be, but they're there. The hardware is there. What is missing is the software part, is that interaction between people going to university, doing research, commercializing their research, and start spinning off companies out of universities. Getting the ideas, as we were talking this morning, about the student coming in and start putting that mindset of being an entrepreneur. And what does it really mean? I mean, the expectations has to be right, because sometimes we're taken by the buzz. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's hard work. And if you talk to people who graduated from iPark, they've been working for 12 years and then they're still not profitable. And it's ups and downs, so the expectations has to be right. But I think there need to be, from the policy level, where the country can set a strategy and provide the right incentives. It's not about this program or that program. It's about where the country wants to go and what is the policy and our strategy in that, and how do we support an enabling environment and a right ecosystem with the right incentives and support in there, all the way to the program level and to the individual level of developing a software, a way to all these organizations, all these programs to interact with each other and create a lot of value in the process. And I think whether it's Silicon Valley or whether it's Chile or Ireland or even Israel, that's what it is about, is how universities link to industry, talent is matching, and as Omar said, experience, the knowledge. You need intimate knowledge, whether about technology or about the customer. before you
Or
go
running
any
a business.
or running a business.
Running a business.
So it's not enough to have a website, in my opinion. You gotta really understand your customer's need. What is the pain with the customer? Or you have some knowledge, technical knowledge that you're providing a superior solution to what exists, and that's what makes business, and people are willing, by the end of the day, paying money for it. So I think the system is there. The components are there. They need to mature a little bit more, but also we need to develop more software and interaction between these components and these players in the system.
Can I just interject quickly with something? I really agree with you a lot about this growing buzz around entrepreneurship, almost like a hype, a bubble, whatever you want to call it. Today, the number one reason people don't join my company is because they want to start their own company. I think that nobody wants to be an employee anymore, which is, I think, a problem. I don't think that everyone should be an entrepreneur. I think we need to dispel some myths about entrepreneurship, that it is easy, that you're going to make a lot of money really quickly. If you talk to some VCs, they'll tell you about entrepreneurs who come in with absurd expectations that their website is worth a couple of $1 million when they have really no traction or any real record of monetization. I really encourage the concept of like this internet as startup. To give people a realistic sense before they go off and say, I'm going to start a startup. Why don't you first work at a startup for 3 months and see what it actually feels like and learn what it takes to run a company before you actually go and run it yourself.
We will touch on this, the advice to entrepreneurs in the later stage. I want to go to Munir. Silicon Valley, we hear Silicon Valley. Is this really the model we want to have in the Arab region? Or there are other models that might be more relevant? You've been in California, you've been in the US, and you are an American citizen and a Lebanese citizen, and you are now back in Lebanon. So I think, you would be able to shed some light on this, because we have this Silicon Valley fever. You hear they want to have a Silicon Valley in Qatar, a Silicon Valley in Emirates, a Silicon Valley everywhere. Can it work? Is this the right model?
I think there are a lot of great things we can learn from Silicon Valley, certainly, and there could be great value in terms of building connections between the region and different hubs, different points in the region in Silicon Valley, certainly. But I think we can also do something that is much more appropriate. We could do something even better than Silicon Valley out here. Silicon Valley started in a day and age where it was very different. It was built around Xerox Research Park and a very big hardware emphasis, etc. There's even this big transition that has taken place over the last couple of years, but in some ways it was a bit difficult between building new forms of investment that would be more relevant for the kind of startups that are now kind of taking over the world in terms of these social apps and new web startups, etc. Out in the region here, I think that we still do have much we can learn from it. I think that a lot of the investment, for example, that happens in the region selects for projects that are very young and inexperienced, small startups that people think will stay small startups. I mean, the idea of some of them are along the lines of wanting to take 1% for $1,000 of investment, and the only people who would accept something like that would be people who think that their startup is going to be small or are very inexperienced. I think in terms of this, what these folks are saying, that the sector here is passionate about helping people start startups, but it's not very good about helping people grow startups is very true, and I think something that we really need to work on here.
Maybe just to follow up, I had my own company in Silicon Valley, and what we really should not try to do is to replicate Silicon Valley. We will never become Silicon Valley, and we should never become Silicon Valley. It's a complete different system. If we want to become Silicon Valley, we probably need to wait another 100 years, because a complete different culture. So what we really should do is just leveraging what happened over there in other areas, and the critical part, what we need to have in the Arab world is helping really to develop more and more entrepreneurs. It's very important. Many of them will fail, but others will really succeed. And we should help them and really take them to the next level. And then the second is what we need to do is talking about them. It's talking about them. And if they hear, oh, Mustafa, Muhammad, my neighbor did it, and why can't I do it as well? So we need to do more in number one in developing new entrepreneurs, and at the same time, as Munir said, taking those that are developed really to the next level and scaling them up. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley works is a lot of successful entrepreneurs, they moved up, become angels, and they moved up to become VCs and so forth. But we don't have it here. We don't have enough successful technology-driven entrepreneurs that moved up to become angel investors, that moved up to VCs. So that's what we should learn from them, absolutely. But it's a complete different system and model we should follow.
Let's just once again go back to the ecosystem and the role of government. And let's be blunt, because when you talk about entrepreneurship, it means autonomous, independent young generation, which is not easy to handle, which is not easy to control, which is contrary to the policy of a lot of governments in this region, of this fatherhood, that we do everything for you, we pay for your marriage, we pay for your house, you don't even have to think. Is this really what the governments of the region want? Do they really want to have this entrepreneurial spirit spreading around and having all these young entrepreneurs being independent and running their own business and feeling the power of being independent and not dependent on the government? Because entrepreneurship means you are not dependent on the government anymore. It means you are part of the global world. And you know, EPRD, I mean, you are very much involved in the region, Rupesh. What do you think? Do you think that governments in the region genuinely really wants to have this entrepreneurship spread around and have independent young entrepreneurs so powerful with successful young businesses spreading around?
Absolutely, I think so. I think governments are realizing that they're no longer capable of creating jobs and creating the necessary infrastructure for their populations. So they kind of need people to kind of resort to their own devices. I think they're starting to recognize that. It's very much part of our mandate to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage economies to open up and become more knowledge-based. Absolutely, I think so. I think there is a sense of nervousness, obviously, also that we're seeing in the region. But I think they fully recognize that they can't do it themselves, and they need to leverage on the private sector to enable that. I think the challenge is they don't know what to do, and that's part of the reason why they keep trying lots of different things, but without kind of a concerted, proper kind of direction or effort. But yeah, no, I do think that the goal is there to encourage more entrepreneurs. They recognize how much wealth can be created. I mean, one of the things that everyone looks at Silicon Valley for one reason: the amount of wealth that has been created per square mile or square kilometer is astronomical. I don't know of any other region in the world that has had a similar. Facebook alone generated, I think, 1,000 multi-millionaires. Jobs that people have in the IT sector pay about 86% more than normal jobs in the private sector even. One IT job creates 5 other jobs in the economy. I mean, the impact of Silicon Valley has been massive, right? And people recognize it, and that's why people are all aspiring to build their own Silicon Valleys. I do agree it's not something that's necessarily feasible, but the kind of the holy grail or the pot of gold is visible to everyone.
But I mean, if that's the case, governments needs to allocate budgets. I mean, if you look at the successful examples where entrepreneurship worked, and let's take Turkey.
I actually completely disagree. I think governments need to do less. They need to act as an enabler to allow the creative, disruptive force to take place. And this is the problem that a lot of governments don't understand. The whole point of entrepreneurship is to quickly enable creative, destructive forces to partake. So it means, establishing companies very quickly, very easily. Even in countries like Poland, I believe it takes 2 months to incorporate. In 2 months, I mean, Instagram was built in 11 days. These guys wouldn't have incorporated their company in the same amount of time that it took to build Instagram, right? So I think governments need to understand that actually the forces of creation and destruction are what you need to enable, and that to do that you actually need to get out of the way and do less, But encourage people to do more. So tax incentives or things like that are very powerful. In the UK, the government introduced a scheme called SEIS, which allows every individual to become an angel investor by basically giving them a 50% tax rebate on any angel investments they make. So suddenly I know friends of mine who have never invested in anything, suddenly writing a $5,000 check and investing in a startup because there's a tax incentive to do it and they think it's cool. And so we need, more and more people to get involved in the ecosystem. And to do that, actually, governments need to get out of the way and let the kind of market drive these things forward.
Munir,
I would partially agree and partially disagree, and I wouldn't actually let governments off the hook too easily with that. And or this easily. There's certainly things that they need to get out of the way for. In terms of the ridiculous process to register a company in most countries in the region. Many people, having to pay several $1,000s or have a $5,000 minimum capital in a bank account, where many startups are started for $5,000. I think these things are much greater barriers than people think. But on the other hand, in terms of things where the government needs to play a much more active role, around education, around supporting research, around improving infrastructure, for goodness sakes, having decent internet and electricity, places to work, or licensing things, etc. I mean, that a lot of this stuff needs to be improved substantially to really make the work of people much easier. Just thinking right now, any time that is spent by a company not on their core competitive work area is distraction. And in some, I know Lebanon is not the model example of this in the region, considering how much problems we have with internet and electricity, etc. But every minute, every hour that is spent on registering a company, or on dealing with bureaucratic paperwork, or on fixing your internet, or any of this stuff, is time that the companies here are losing in their competitive effort against other companies that are working in Silicon Valley or UK or elsewhere. I think they are more afraid than they care to admit, and why these things are not getting fixed.
Thank you,
quicker.
because when I hear this, they have to get out of the way. It scares me, because it's like saying, "Idhab anta wa rabbuka faqatila." This is what it means for some of the governments, because I don't think getting out of the way in the US is the same meaning here, because there are a lot of things that the government must do in terms of the regulatory framework, education system, infrastructure. That's the responsibility of the government. If the government does not change the laws, if the government does not put tax incentives, if the government does not invest in the education, improving the education, then it's impossible to have entrepreneurship work. Wissam.
No, I totally, absolutely agree. There is a responsibility for government. That's why we pay taxes. But the government doesn't know where to interfere, where not to interfere. So when it comes to get out of the way, get out of the way. Just set up policies, set up incentives, as we said, just like in the angel investors in the UK. Set up the incentive system to shape behavior. But in certain areas, like in Jordan sometimes, government actually evaluate business plans for grants. Are governments set up to evaluate business plans and decide which company can take a grant and which company? It takes a year to hear a decision. And then sometimes the technology is too complex, the business plan and the business model is too complex for the governments are not set up to do that. So they should seek out to the private sector and seek their advice and their help in deciding how to distribute resources to incentivize companies and set up policies, incentive systems that will lead you to where you want to go, and then step out of the way.
Ahmed.
No, I agree with you. The government should really make the ease of doing business make the starting business much more easier, and that's one of the most important pieces. But there are some simple things that governments and big companies can really do to have a big impact, which is the procurement system. So instead of buying from large companies, the government and as well the big companies, they should give more a chance to the small companies, to the early stage companies, as $1 or $100 that they receive as a sales, it's more worth than $100 investment that the startup can get. So in other words, instead of focusing on grants and all the other stuff, governments and particular big companies, they should really open up their procurement system to give more opportunities for startup companies and small, medium enterprises. This
Omar,
would have a significant impact.
Yeah, Omar, I mean, I believe that governments in this region has a huge responsibility, and I am with them getting out of the way in the areas where they have to get out of the way, for sure. But there are certain areas that, to be frank, and I'm one of those who are investing in the startups of the region, and looking around, I believe that governments, there are certain areas I should not carry its burden as an angel investor or as a seed fund or as a VC fund, while at this early stage, because we are still at an early stage, there must be some budgets from governments to basically make this process and make this momentum really mature enough. I mean, what do you think?
So I think it's interesting for us, especially here, we're at the Dead Sea. Across the sea from us is one of the most successful venture and technology hubs in the world. And so if we think about the model of Israel and how they were able to create a venture and technology industry out of nothing, right? A couple of initiatives that they were able to run as a government, specifically. One, they ran something called the Yozma Initiative, which essentially the government put $100 million into VC funds. It was a matching fund system where they put in 10 million, the fund put in 10 million, and the funds had an option to buy back the government's stake. And I believe 70 or 80% of the funds bought back the government's stake because it was so successful.
90%.
90%. Okay, so 90%. So extremely successful program that essentially helped reduce the risk of investors and encourage them to get into venture capital investing. Another thing that they did was they set up something called the Office of the Chief Scientist, which is also really interesting. They had an influx of Russian immigrants, a lot of whom were scientists. And so they created systems whereby they created a network of incubators, and they gave money to these scientists to commercialize their research, and they gave them deadlines, essentially. So you had X period of time during which they would support you, and they would help you commercialize your research, and then after which...
They fund up to 85% of the startup.
Right, so we're talking about, I think when I did this research, it was like 26 incubation centers across the country, specifically for commercializing scientific research. So these are just some of the initiatives that we can learn from.
I just want to comment on a couple of things. One, let's not forget, governments are notoriously bad at capital allocation, right? So anytime there's capital budget allocation from governments, they muck it up. I'm sorry, but they muck it up. So I think looking to governments for capital allocation is a bad idea, generally.
But we're I'm talking about a fund of funds, right? I'm not talking about
that's capital allocation. To me, that's capital allocation. Governments are bad at it. And they always have been. They're always over budget, misspent, kind of procurement processes that are out of control. You name me one country in the world where there's good capital allocation, I'll be impressed. The second thing is I think actually the Israeli model, we can debate this offline. I mean, I'm happy to go into a lot of detail. That's why we have budget deficits everywhere in the world, right? Because they don't know how to allocate capital. The Israeli model is actually a bad model in my book, right? If you look at what the VC industry in Israel is today, it's actually in a lot of trouble. And most of them are looking outside of Israel to make investments. The whole industry was procured on the defense industry, right? I mean, the whole success was a hardware-driven defense industry. They sold businesses to Cisco, and it became, and now this industry has shifted, right? We've moved to an app world, to a web-based world, and actually the Israeli companies are struggling a lot with it. So I don't actually think the Israeli model was necessarily the best model for a region like MENA. And I think we need to look at it with a lot of caution. Today, the Israeli venture industry is in a lot of trouble. So I don't think we necessarily want to replicate that.
What about the Turkish model? Because the Turkish model also, there are government subsidies involved.
Yeah, and again, I mean, there's some great guys here in the audience somewhere, 212, local Turkish fund. They'll tell you all about how bad that is working with the grant system in Turkey, right? I mean, $100,000 are given to 500 companies a year. You know, for basically two guys to kind of pay themselves a nice salary and move on with life, right? So government is notoriously bad at capital allocation. This is a proven fact, and I think my colleague here on the right is going to agree with me. So they should actually get out of the capital allocation game, allow the private sector to make capital allocation effectively, right? Which is by providing incentives, encouraging companies to make capital expenditure on their own books for R&D, to buy new software, to buy new hardware, so that small companies.
But the
can actually
ecosystem is not
access.
only capital. The ecosystem, it's a whole system.
No, we were talking specifically about investing and how the Israeli government did what they did in Israel, right? So I was just picking up on the capital allocation point that Omar was bringing up. Of course, there's other things government can do, right? Again, education has been brought up a lot, but entrepreneurs are not educated, right? You don't learn to become an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurism is experimentation, right? It's a lifestyle. It's a choice. I do agree that culturally the shift needs to take place, where we say, actually, that is a career, that is a choice you should make, rather than people shaking their heads saying, oh, why don't you go work for IBM instead of kind of starting a company, right?
Just entrepreneurship can be learned. It's absolutely entrepreneurship can be learned. This is something that really most people don't underestimate.
Well,
you can learn it. It's
on the Israeli model,
somewhere in between.
On the Israeli model, I mean, I don't really like to have that model presented in my panels, because I always say, give me a free land and give me few $10 billion every year, and I'll show you what I can do. Definitely, I can do much more than what they have done in the Israeli model. So, but there's nothing wrong with using some of the examples that have been identified.
And I mean, it's similar to Singapore. It's similar to a lot of models.
Chile. No. Listen. I mean, I'm of the opinion that governments have responsibilities in this part of the world, because government have created so much troubles for the private sector and have been the main obstacle. The private sector in this region have suffered because of government. So I would not let the government off the hook just that easy. Governments have responsibilities, and when I see government spending tens of billions of dollars buying airplanes that have never been used and will never be used, and I say, well, don't put money for entrepreneurship. Sorry, I will not accept that. And the same governments that are wasting these $10 billions of dollars on airplanes that were never used, they have to spend money on education, infrastructure, improve the legal framework.
You've just confirmed my point, that they cannot allocate capital. You've just confirmed my point.
They know how to misallocate capital.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I'm suggesting, is rather than misallocating the capital.
Absolutely agree.
And the thing that you mentioned in Turkey, I don't agree with you that giving $100,000, because it's spent in a bad way, doesn't mean the idea is wrong. You can put the right rules for using this money in an efficient way. I think this is a debate that can continue, but honestly, I think in this region, governments have came up with wrong policies in registration of companies, taxes, education, all of this, and they have to fix it. I'm not the government. I'm not the one who will change the laws. I'm not the one who decides what kind of internet and what kind of license. I'm not the one who decides free movement of goods between the Arab. It's not my decision as a citizen or as a private sector. It's the governments, and they have to fix it, and I don't think we should and we must not let them off the hook. Let's just move to another area, because we need to make some progress and make some conclusions. Let's look at the entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs and later on I will talk about the other elements of the ecosystem, the angel investors and the funds. Entrepreneurs of the region. Yesterday we were talking about, and Omar mentioned that a second ago, entrepreneurs themselves are somehow confused, somehow getting the wrong message in terms of how this thing should go. Their role, because to me, they are the fuel of the whole process. And if they don't get it right, even with government doing the right thing and with funds available, it will not work. So what do you say to these young entrepreneurs? And this is, as you all know, something that's only happening for the last 2-3 years. It's not something that's been happening for 50 years. So what's your advice to the young entrepreneurs of the region? What is it that they should focus on? What is the big no? Don't do that, or don't make this mistake. What's your advice to the entrepreneurs of the region? And I would like to hear from each one of you. We'll start with Ahmed.
Let's do the following. We learned from the business schools and the textbooks that when entrepreneurs, when you have an idea, you develop your business plan and you waste 3 to 6 months' time, and then you develop a product as a prototype, alpha version, beta version, and commercial version, and you're wondering why nobody's picking up your product. So as an advice for entrepreneurs is really just don't go for the traditional approach of entrepreneurship, and try to validate your idea as early as possible. And the best and the only way to do it is go to a customer right in the beginning and really iterate anything that you do, your problem, your proposed solution. Then you develop what's so-called a minimum viable product, and which is a feature or function, one little piece of a time, whatever that is, and you go back and really iterate. With regard to the funding side as well, it's not what we learned in the business school or in the textbooks, that you have an idea, you pitch it to an investor, and the investor will invest. It's not going to work like that. So think about, as an advice for entrepreneurs, when you develop your business model, and instead of asking for X amount of money or $100,000 or $200,000 or $1 million or whatever that is, think about what is the opportunity, build a team around, and then focus on what are the specific resources that you need. So instead of asking for $100,000 or whatever, think about what are the specific resources that you need, what would you do with the money, and then think who in the value chain or in the business model would benefit most, so you don't need to pay cash. So that reduces your cash amount. So that's one way of really bootstrapping.
Give more value. Thank you. Rubish.
It's a tough question. I mean, I would say, three things. Find a problem that you're extremely passionate about, that you really kind of can get really committed to, and focus on that. Just focus on the problem. Don't worry about anything else. Work extremely hard and have fun. I think these are the three things, very, very important. Don't forget to have fun. It's a lonely, difficult process of starting a company. It's a lot of work, and you have to work hard, but don't forget to enjoy yourselves. I think on the other, no is don't get caught up in this whole, where's my next round of financing coming? If you actually are solving a real problem in the world, everything else will take care of itself.
I think reiterating some stuff that was said, that there is an obsession with starting up, and some people have come to us and said, hey, I have 3 great ideas, or I have 3 ideas, I should say. Which one do you think I should build a business around? And they're totally different, irrelevant to each other. And it's clear that they're not actually passionate about any of them. They're just kind of tossing balls up in the air to see if something sticks. And I think this is a big problem. I think that some of the advice that I give to a lot of people who come to us and want to talk about their startup, or they want to be an entrepreneur, etc., is I encourage them to go and explore, play, talk to people, get a job, do some consulting or contract work, to do something other than that, to figure out what they're actually really excited by, what they want to spend years working on, to actually develop some skills. I think that it's a quite crazy situation here, that most people go through school and university, maybe even graduate school, and have yet to work a single day in a normal full-time job in their lives, and they want to be entrepreneurs. There's a bunch of talk in these circles about needing to have people become much more engaged in internships, but also just get jobs, get summer jobs, get jobs after school, after university, get some real work experience. And then I say, come back in a couple months and let's talk about your startup or what you want to actually do. So get some real experience that you can build on.
So, David stole my thunder, but it's, as I mentioned before, really number one thing I would say to a young entrepreneur: get a job first, right? Like running a company requires relationships, experience, know-how, resources, selling your first client, hiring your first employee, firing your first employee. All of these things, I'm not confident that a 21-year-old fresh out of college will be able to execute on any of these things properly.
I have to interject. Gates, Dell,
okay, great.
Zuckerberg.
I'm going to get to this immediately.
Never had a job.
I'm going to get to this immediately.
Didn't even finish college.
So I talked to a Silicon Valley investor, and I asked him this question. I said, how did Mark Zuckerberg do it? I mean, he's a 21-year-old entrepreneur. Here I am. I'm 30. I run a small company. I have all of these daily challenges of running and scaling a small business. How did he do it? And he said, do you know what he did when he was interviewing people? and this is my second point, which is he said, what is it that you have that is going to make sure I do not make the mistakes that I would make because of my lack of experience, right? And this is where, if you are a 21-year-old entrepreneur, find your Sheryl Sandberg, right? Find the people who do have the experience, knowledge, and relationships to be able to help you get to the next level, but certainly do not imagine that as a 21-year-old entrepreneur, you're going to be able to do it by yourself.
Also, these
Will you accept that, Rupesh?
Also, these were not these people's first jobs. It was their first main companies, but Apple was not Steve Jobs' first company.
Let's put Apple and Microsoft aside, or Facebook. Yeah. Sure. What it means, Omar, just to be clear, because you don't have to wait until you graduate and find your first job. Personally, I worked when I was still at school, and sometimes you can build that skill of being a good salesperson or a good critical thinker and making mistakes. And let me tell you, one of the most beautiful mistakes that I'll never forget. I was selling vegetables in the summer, and I had the whole truck of mulukhiyah, and I went to a Druze village. And nobody's buying mulukhiyah. And until I discovered that it's haram for Druze to eat mulukhiyah. So, making such mistakes in your life, you understand that you don't sell mulukhiyah in a Druze village. If I did not do that, I would not learn. So it doesn't have to be until I finish from university and work. No, I think it is possible, but the message is you have to get experience. You get this experience while you are in the university or outside the university. If you can get this experience and this exposure and this skill set that's required to be a successful entrepreneur while you're in the university, then why not?
So I'm just not sure that you can actually. I think that the example that you gave is a specific experience, but I don't know that you can get the experience of managing a team and hiring and firing, doing organizational structure, incentivizing, retaining, selling to clients, growing the business, differentiating your product, dealing with competitors as a college student.
Wissam.
I agree that some sort of knowledge is needed. And our friends from ERPD said, just find the problem. Well, finding the problems, have the solution, is to identify a burning need of the customer and as a problem, and you find a solution for it. Well, you're halfway there. Second is execution. I think most great entrepreneurs, they execute in their ideas. It's not just the ideas. And I just want to say regarding Michael Dell and Bill Gates and all these examples we keep using, in Arabic there is a say that said, حالات يؤخذ بها ولا يقاس عليها. I can't really take these as the typical entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs has to have some sort of knowledge, whether it's technical knowledge, whether it's market knowledge, somehow be able to identify that problem, find a solution that people will pay for it. I think you can learn, not necessarily in school. You can learn by doing things. You can learn by working for somebody. Or if you have this great idea, sometimes we tell people, go hire that experienced CEO. Remain the founder. But go get yourself a really experienced CEO to run the company and grow the company for you if you lack that kind of experience. I don't think there is a magical formula for it, but we encourage people to entrepreneur, just be realistic, know the expectations. If you're realistic about the expectations and what is coming, that there's 18 hours work, that there is lack of money, that it's not as glamorous as people lately been believing, then it's fine. You can manage your expectations.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think we have to end it here. And I think today it was an interesting discussion talking about the ecosystem, governments, entrepreneurs, and I do believe we do have a lot of success stories in our region. We all still talk about Maktoub and the Maktoub deal. We all know that there are companies that started from Jordan and became global or regional companies. Aramix is an example. MENA ICT, Iskadenia, even Cheche. These are real examples of companies that have been created by an entrepreneur in Jordan, and there are lots of examples from Lebanon, from the other countries. So I think it's doable, it can be done, and today I think what we talked about vis-a-vis the acceleration that can be done and the role of the different stakeholders hopefully will be beneficial and useful to those who are targeted toward the message that we try to deliver today. So thank you very much, and thanks for, I'm sorry I'm not going to have questions because we are asked to stop, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdel Malik, and apologies to the audience for having to shorten the session. Thank you to the wonderful panelists, Ahmed, David, Dr. Wissam, Omar, Rupesh. Great insights. And clearly Dr. Abdel Malik is the kind of guy who likes to have his shisha in the morning. He's probably going to go to have one right now. Can we ask catering to please make sure there is no mlukhiyya for lunch? Just in case any of our brothers and sisters from the Druze community are with us today. And now, I want to remind everyone, just a quick point of order. We have a fantastic exhibition going on downstairs. So please, during the coffee breaks, lunch, take an opportunity to go downstairs, check out some of the fantastic companies we have and teams we have that are exhibiting. You've got the names up there, and there's also the gaming stand. Very, very interesting stuff going on. You can also grab coffee, sandwiches, pizzas from the Lacali station downstairs.